The sound hit first, a deep trembling roar that made the ground itself shiver. I ran outside barefoot heart, hammering just in time to see a wall of water explode through the valley. Cars, trees, entire homes were swallowed in seconds. The dam, the one I'd warned them about for months, was gone. The lake had turned into a monster, tearing everything apart. I could hear people screaming sirens, blaring alarms echoing off the hills. And through it all, one thought cut through the chaos. They laughed at me. 2 weeks earlier, I'd begged the HOA president, Stella Green, to take the crack in the dam seriously. She smiled, called me paranoid, and told the board to ignore Mark Hall's little science project. Now her $1 million mansion was floating down what used to be our main street. Before we dive into how it all happened, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Because this story will show you exactly how pride, ignorance, and a single crack can drown an entire community. People always say every neighborhood has that one person who complains too much, the guy who points out every uneven sidewalk and leaves angry notes about trash bins. In our lake community, that guy was supposedly me. Mark Hall, the engineer who worries too much. When my wife and I moved into Clearwater Estates, it was supposed to be our quiet place to retire. The home sat around a shimmering artificial lake bordered by pine trees and a walking path that wrapped along the dam. It was peaceful until I noticed what no one else did. One crisp October morning, I was on my usual jog when I saw a faint, jagged line running across the lower concrete section of the dam. It wasn't wide, but it wasn't new either. You could see how the edges had darkened from moisture, how the surrounding soil had softened. And as a civil engineer who had once supervised municipal drainage projects, I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. The dam was beginning to fail. I stopped right there, crouched down, and touched it. Water seeped faintly from the crack, cold and steady like a pulse. My stomach sank. I snapped a few pictures on my phone, zoomed in, and noted the location. That same afternoon, I sent an email to the HOA board. I wasn't trying to sound dramatic. I kept it professional, included photos, outlined the risks, and recommended a safety inspection. I even volunteered to help them coordinate with the county's water management team. An hour later, I got a short reply from the HOA president herself. "Thank you for your concern, Mark. The dam is inspected annually and has never shown any structural risk. We'll look into it. No urgency, no plan." Just brushed off like I'd complained about a broken mailbox. 2 days later, I attended the monthly HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse overlooking the lake. That's where I first met Stella Green in person. If perfection had a personality, it would be Stella. Mid-50s, immaculate blonde hair, pastel pink suit pearls that gleamed under the fluorescent light. She ran the HOA like a queen ruling a perfectly manicured kingdom. Behind her smile was a tone that told you, "I'm right, and you're lucky I let you speak." I stood up during the community input section trying to stay calm. "I'm concerned about a structural crack I found on the north base of the dam. If water continues to penetrate," she raised a manicured hand mid-sentence. "Mr. Hall, right, you're fairly new here, yes, about 6 months. Well," she said, with a polite laugh, turning to the others, "we've had this dam since before you moved in. It's survived more storms than I can count. I'm sure your engineering background is impressive, but maybe we don't need a full lecture today." A few people chuckled. One man whispered, "He's serious, look at him," but no one intervened. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to continue. "This isn't about theory, Stella. The crack is active, it's leaking. You might not see the signs now, but give it a few more weeks of rain." Stella leaned forward, smiling thinly. "Mark, you seem like a nice man, but this community thrives on trust and calm. If we start panicking over every puddle, we'll be living in fear. And I don't run a community based on fear." The way she said "I" instead of "we" told me everything I needed to know. I left the meeting embarrassed but angry. The next morning, I walked by the dam again just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The crack had widened slightly. Mud had pooled near the base where there hadn't been any before. I took more photos and this time went door to door, showing them to a few neighbors. Some were polite but disinterested. They trusted Stella more than a new guy. One neighbor, old Mr. Roberts, actually patted my shoulder and said, "Relax, Mark. That dam's been there since the 82nds. It's fine." But I knew what fine looked like, and this wasn't it. Later that week, during my evening walk, I saw Stella and a couple of board members inspecting the dam, at least from a distance. They weren't even looking at the base. Stella spotted me and called out, "See, Mark, nothing to worry about." She pointed toward the lake's calm surface, like it proved her point. I wanted to shout that looks could be deceiving, that a dam doesn't fail gradually, it fails suddenly. But what good would it do? That night, I updated my report and sent it again, this time with technical references, diagrams, and even photos comparing the dam's current state to last year's. The next morning, I got a new email, shorter and colder than before. Mark, spreading unnecessary alarm violates HOA community guidelines. Please refrain from contacting members directly or making claims about structural safety without authorization. Stella Green. I sat back in disbelief. Not only did she ignore the problem, she made me the problem. I showed the email to my wife Karen, not the ironic kind of Karen, thankfully. She sighed and rubbed her temples. Honey, maybe let it go. These people aren't going to listen. You've done your part. I can't, I said quietly. If this thing fails, we're all in danger. I can't just pretend it's fine. Over the next week, I began documenting everything more thoroughly. Rainfall data, ground moisture readings, drone footage. My engineering instincts had fully kicked in. It wasn't obsession, it was responsibility. But the more I documented, the more pushback I got. The HOA group chat turned toxic. Someone posted a meme of me holding a hard hat with the caption "Doomsday Hall reporting for duty." It got dozens of laughing emojis. Even Stella commented, "Gotta love enthusiasm, that one stung." Not because of the joke, but because it showed how little they cared. A few nights later, a neighbor knocked on my door, holding one of my printed warning flyers. "Hey Mark, maybe ease up on this stuff Stella's talking about issuing fines if you cause distress." I stared at him speechless. Distress? The only distress is going to be when that dam gives out. He shrugged. "I'm just telling you what I heard. She says it's under control. Under control." Two words that mean nothing when physics disagrees. The next morning it rained. A steady drizzle at first, then heavier. I grabbed my binoculars and looked across the lake. Even from my porch I could see it. The waterline had climbed higher and the crack's dark streak had doubled in length. By now I'd stopped caring about being popular. I took my camera, put on my raincoat, and headed straight to the dam, ignoring the HOA's little restricted access sign. I crouched near the base, my flashlight sweeping across the damp concrete. The fissure had deepened. Water was oozing through, trickling down in thin, silvery lines. I pressed my palm against the cold surface. You could feel the vibration, faint, rhythmic, like the dam was breathing. That was the moment my fear turned to dread. As I stood there, thunder rolled in the distance. I knew then that time was running out. I took one last photo, stepped back and muttered under my breath, "If they won't listen now, they'll listen when it's too late." And as the rain began to pour harder, soaking me to the bone, I realized something else. Sometimes the worst disaster isn't the one nature causes, it's the one arrogance invites. By the following week, Clearwater Estates didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage where everyone pretended not to see the cracks forming, both in the dam and in their own sense of security. The rain hadn't stopped in days. Thin streams of runoff streaked down the roads, forming small pools at the base of driveways. Kids splashed in puddles while parents chatted about lawn maintenance, ignoring the fact that the water level in the lake had risen almost 2 feet since last Monday. And still not one word from the HOA. I decided to try again. I printed out my report, bound it neatly in a folder labeled "Urgent Structural Integrity Concern, Clearwater Dam." I figured maybe if I presented it in person, they'd at least pretend to take it seriously. So I walked into the HOA office, one humid afternoon, water dripping off my raincoat. The fluorescent lights flickered above a front desk, stacked with brochures about community beautification projects. Behind the desk sat Jody, Stella's assistant, a woman who spoke entirely in fake smiles. "Hi, Mark," she said, her tone sugary enough to rot teeth. "Mrs. Green isn't available right now. She's in a planning meeting for the annual spring gala." "The dam's leaking, Jody," I said flatly. "This can't wait until after the gala." Her smile didn't budge. "I'll make sure to pass along your concerns." I could practically hear the sarcasm dripping from every syllable. I placed the folder on her desk. "Tell her this isn't about concerns, it's about liability." That got her attention. The smile flickered for half a second before she grabbed the folder and muttered, "I'll let her know." That night, I received another email, this one colder than ice. From HOA President Stella Green, subject "Community Conduct Reminder." "Mark, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, spreading exaggerated or alarming information about community infrastructure can cause unnecessary panic. Continuing to distribute unverified reports will result in fines under Section 4B of the HOA Code of Conduct. Please let our licensed inspectors handle all maintenance matters." I stared at the message for a long time, jaw tightening. Licensed inspectors, I'd never seen a single one near that dam. And calling my reports unverified, I was an engineer with a 20-year record of government work. This was insanity. The next morning I went down to the dam again. This time I brought a measuring gauge and marked the crack width with chalk. It was wider by at least 4 millimeters since my last visit. The soil near the foundation was dark and soft. One step too close, and my boot sank halfway in. I recorded a video. This is Mark Hall. It's October 23rd, 742 amperes. The seepage is now continuous. If this isn't repaired immediately, structural failure is inevitable. I didn't post it publicly yet, but I uploaded it to the cloud for backup. Something inside me whispered that soon I might need proof. That same day, I found a letter taped to my front door. Notice of community violation. Resident Mark Hall is hereby notified that repeated trespassing on restricted HOA property, the dam, and the circulation of unapproved information are violations of community rules. Continued behavior may result in fines or suspension of community privileges. I laughed bitterly. They didn't fix the dam, but they sure moved fast to protect their reputation. Later that afternoon, I drove to the county water safety department downtown. The front desk clerk, a young guy named Peter, greeted me with a nervous smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but Clearwater Estates falls under private HOA jurisdiction. We can't conduct inspections without a formal request from their board." "Even if there's a risk of failure?" I asked. He hesitated. "We'd need evidence of imminent danger. Photos, measurements, anything official." I handed him a USB drive with everything I'd collected. "Then start with this. If that dam breaks, it won't matter whose jurisdiction it is, it'll flood the entire valley." He promised to forward it to his supervisor, but I could tell he wasn't sure what to do with it. Bureaucracy is like concrete, it only moves when it cracks. When I got home, there were messages waiting for me in the HOA group chat. "Stella Green neighbors, please disregard false information circulating about the dam. There is no risk of failure. We have spoken with a professional consultant and everything is stable. Neighbor 1, thank you Stella, I was worried after seeing those photos from Mark. Neighbor 2, appreciate you keeping us calm, Stella. That guy's been obsessed. That word stung more than I expected. I wasn't obsessed, I was trying to save them. But it didn't stop there. The next morning, someone had taped a note to my mailbox. Maybe focus on your own yard, engineer." That's when I realized Stella wasn't just ignoring me. She was turning the neighborhood against me. The rain kept falling. The lake grew higher. At night, I could hear it from my window, the low humming sound of water pressing against the dam wall, steady and relentless. I couldn't sleep. So I did what I knew best. I analyzed. I pulled up old blueprints of the dam, comparing load distributions, estimated tensile strength, and hydrostatic pressure increase per inch of rainfall. The numbers didn't lie. We were less than a month away from catastrophic failure. The next day, I called Stella directly. To my surprise, she picked up. "Mrs. Green, it's Mark Hall. We need to talk about the dam," she sighed dramatically. "Mark, this again. Honestly, this is bordering on harassment. I've already spoken to a professional, and they confirmed everything is fine." "What professional?" I demanded. "Name, certification, report, anything." She hesitated. "You don't need to know that. The board approved their findings." "Because they told you what you wanted to hear," I snapped. "You're ignoring data. You're ignoring physics." Her voice turned sharp. "You're scaring people, Mark. If you continue this behavior, I'll have to involve legal counsel." The line went dead. For the first time, I felt genuinely afraid, not for me, but for everyone else. Because if Stella was willing to silence me to save face, then no one would be prepared when the dam finally gave way. That night, the rain turned into a full-on storm. Thunder rolled over the lake, shaking the windows. I stood on my porch, watching the water surge against the embankment like it was trying to break free. Suddenly, my phone buzzed a message from my neighbor Eric, who lived closer to the dam. "Hey man, I think you might be right. There's water leaking out near the lower path. Ground feels soft. Should I call someone?" I didn't even respond. I grabbed my flashlight and keys and drove down there myself. Eric was waiting with an umbrella, pointing to a dark patch of soil. "See that? It's bubbling." He wasn't wrong. The ground was pulsing slightly, like air or water pushing upward. My heart sank. "That's piping erosion," I said. "The dam's foundation is being eaten away from the inside." Eric's face went pale. "What do we do? Call the HOA," I said, though we both knew what the answer would be. Sure enough, when he reached Stella, she told him to stay calm and avoid spreading false rumors. The next morning, I got another HOA notice. This one was almost comical. "Mr. Hall, you are hereby fined $500 for unauthorized access to HOA property during severe weather. Additionally, any further contact with residents regarding the dam will be considered harassment." I laughed so hard I nearly tore the paper in half. "Harassment," I muttered. "Wait until you see what Mother Nature's planning." Still, part of me was sinking under the weight of exhaustion. Every warning, every photo, every word dismissed. I felt like shouting into a hurricane. That night I stood by my window staring at the stormlit surface of the lake. The wind howled through the trees and thunder cracked so close it shook the glass. For a moment, lightning illuminated the dam in the distance, and I swore I saw it bow ever so slightly, just enough to make me whisper under my breath, "It's starting." But no one else saw it. No one else wanted to. And by the time they did, it would be far too late. The storm that would change everything began on a Thursday. The weather forecast said heavy rain, but the clouds above Clearwater Estates looked like something far worse, a thick, swirling wall of gray pressing down on the lake like a lid. The air felt electric heavy with static. Birds vanished. The silence before the first crack of thunder was suffocating. By noon, the rain came in sheets. Gutters overflowed water rushed through the streets, and the lake swelled high enough to swallow the bottom of the docks. Still, the HOA group chat was full of messages about the spring gala being postponed, not the dam. I watched from my porch, gripping the railing. Every instinct in me screamed that this was the moment. The water was cresting dangerously near the top spillway. One wrong surge, and it could overtop the dam. The first step toward full failure. I grabbed my camera, waterproof jacket, and car keys. "Where are you going?" my wife shouted as thunder cracked above us. "To get proof," I said. Before they call me crazy again. The roads were slick and half-flooded, but I made it to the dam. The wind ripped at my jacket, rain slicing sideways like shards of glass. Even through the storm, I could hear it, a deep guttural rumble, like something alive groaning under strain. The dam was vibrating. I crouched near the base flashlight, trembling in my hand. The crack that had once been hairline now gaped wide enough for me to fit 2 fingers inside. Water was seeping through in bursts, pulsing with every wave hitting the other side. It was like watching the heartbeat of something dying. I started recording. This is Mark Hall, October 29, 3:14 p.m. Continuous leakage through the northern section. Significant displacement visible. The dam is not safe. Immediate evacuation recommended. I sent the footage to the county's emergency response email with the subject line, "Urgent, imminent structural failure, Clearwater Dam." Then I copied Stella and the HOA board, attaching every report I'd ever written. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Stella. "Mark," she began, her voice sharp, even over the crackle of static. "What on earth are you doing? You just sent a panic message to the entire board," I shouted over the thunder. "You need to evacuate the residents now. The dam's compromised." "Stop this nonsense," she snapped. "You're scaring people during a storm." "The HOA has already spoken with an inspector who confirmed everything is fine." "Who is this inspector?" I demanded. "Name." "License number." Anything, she hesitated. "That's none of your concern." Lightning split the sky behind me. "If you don't act now, it will be your concern in about 24 hours when you're chest deep in water." "Mark, calm down," she barked. "You're not in charge here." That was the last thing she said before hanging up. I stared at my phone, rainwater dripping from my hair, fury boiling inside me. "No," I muttered to myself. "Not yet. But I will be when this is over." By nightfall, the storm intensified. Power flickered across the neighborhood. The sound of rain was constant, relentless blending with the low hum of water pounding the dam. I sat by the window flashlight beside me, watching the trees bend under the wind. At 1:03:00 p.m., the HOA sent an official notice through email. "To all residents, please remain calm. The dam is stable, and the rising water levels are within acceptable limits. Avoid spreading misinformation." Clearwater Estates, HOA President Stella Green. I wanted to throw my laptop through the wall. Stable, my camera footage showed literal water jets spraying from the dam wall. Around midnight, the rain hit a new level of fury. It wasn't just water anymore, it was sound, vibration, chaos. The house shook as wind gusts slammed into it. I could barely see the lake anymore, only the faint reflection of lightning flickering across its surface. I turned to my wife. "Pack a bag," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Just essentials, clothes, papers, flashlights. We're leaving tonight." Her voice wavered. "You think it's really going to happen?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." I helped her into her raincoat, grabbed my hard drive, and loaded everything into the truck. But before we could pull out, headlights approached from behind us. It was a police SUV. A tall deputy stepped out, rain pouring off his hat. "Evening, sir. You Mark Hall?" "Yes." He handed me a paper, soaked but still legible, a cease and desist order from the HOA's legal counsel. "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "She called the police now." The deputy gave me an apologetic shrug. "They said you've been trespassing and spreading panic. Look, I don't know the full story, but Maybe stay inside until the weather clears, all right, I could have screamed. Instead, I just nodded. Sure, deputy. Stay safe. He drove off. I stared after him, then looked back at the lake, dark, swollen, angry. Inside, my phone buzzed again, a message from Eric, the same neighbor who'd noticed the bubbling soil before. Mark, something's wrong. The ground near the lower path collapsed. Water's coming through fast. That was all I needed. I didn't care what the HOA said anymore. I grabbed my jacket camera and flashlight and drove straight there. When I arrived, the rain was so heavy I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The dirt path was half-eroded, chunks of it sinking into the torrent below. The dam looked monstrous under the lightning flashes, concrete scarred and trembling with water gushing from multiple cracks now. Eric waved at me, shouting through the storm. It's getting worse. You were right, I know, I yelled back. Get your family out now. I climbed up onto the embankment, shining my flashlight across the surface. You could see the bowing. The entire midsection of the dam had a subtle, horrifying curve. It was no longer resisting the pressure, it was absorbing it. Behind me, sirens started wailing, maybe from town, maybe from other panicked residents finally calling for help. I pulled out my phone, started live streaming. This is Mark Hall. The Clearwater Dam is failing right now. If anyone from emergency services can see this, we need an evacuation immediately. The signal cut in and out, but the footage uploaded anyway. I turned toward Eric, who was helping his wife into their truck. Go, I shouted. Get up the hill and don't stop until you're clear. He nodded, face pale. As I turned back toward the dam, another sound joined the storm, a sharp cracking noise, like a gunshot magnified 1,000 times. The crack had expanded vertically, splitting the concrete seam. Water spurted out, not in drops, but in jets. Oh God, I whispered. I jumped into my truck, flooring the gas. Mud sprayed behind me as I climbed the hill toward home. I glanced in the mirror once, just once, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The center of the dam bowed inward, the middle section dipping like paper under weight. Lightning illuminated it for a fraction of a second, and I saw what looked like a dark line racing across the entire span, a fracture running from end to end. I didn't need to see the rest. I knew what came next. By the time I reached home, the street was already half flooded. I helped my wife into the truck, my voice trembling. We're leaving. Now. She looked back at the lake, her face pale. Mark, is it? A thunderclap drowned her words. I didn't answer. We drove uphill toward the county road, rain hammering the windshield. And behind us, though, faint under the storm, came a sound I will never forget. A deep, drawn-out groan from the earth itself, followed by a crack that shook the air like an explosion. The dam had begun to break. By the time I reached the top of Ridgeview Hill, the storm had turned the valley into a gray, writhing ocean. The rain wasn't falling anymore, it was pouring sideways, driven by winds that felt like they could rip trees from the ground. My wipers barely made a difference. Every few seconds, lightning would flash across the sky, revealing the lake below, swollen and restless, smashing against the trembling dam. My wife Karen clutched my arm. Mark, please just keep driving. We need to get out. But I couldn't. Not yet. I pulled the truck over near the ridge that overlooked the entire lake and grabbed my binoculars. The dam looked worse than I'd ever seen, a jagged, pale line now split across the middle like a wound. Water sprayed through several openings in violent bursts, shooting 20, maybe 30 feet high. Dear God, I muttered. It's going. Behind me, I could hear the faint hum of other cars climbing the hill, some neighbors finally deciding to leave. But it was too late for most of them. I turned the ignition off. The thunder rolled so deep it vibrated the ground beneath us. The wind carried the unmistakable low roar of rushing water, not the gentle flow of a stream, but the crushing, unstoppable force of thousands of gallons slamming against a weakening wall. I grabbed my phone and hit record again. This is Mark Hall. It's now 2:46 a.m. The Clearwater Dam is failing. The spillway has overtopped and multiple fractures are visible. If anyone's watching this, evacuate immediately. This is not a false alarm. Karen's voice broke through my focus. Mark, we have to go, I hesitated. The engineer in me wanted to see it happen, to document the failure, for proof, for accountability, for the record that I had been right all along. But the husband in me, the man who could feel the tremor of fear in his wife's voice, knew there was nothing left to prove. I lowered the binoculars, started the truck again, and began the slow crawl up the mountain road. But before we reached the turnoff, the sound hit a low, booming thud that echoed like cannon fire. Karen gasped. What was that? Then came another, and another. The dam wasn't cracking anymore, it was breaking apart. I slammed the brakes and turned off the engine. In that brief silence between thunderclaps, we heard the most terrifying sound I've ever known, the deep guttural snap of concrete surrendering. It was followed by a noise that didn't even sound real, a churning, rumbling roar that shook the air itself. The dam had failed. I jumped out of the truck rain, pelting my face so hard I could barely keep my eyes open. Lightning flashed again, revealing the horror below. The entire central section of the dam had collapsed. A dark, massive surge of water surged forward, exploding through the breach like a released beast. The lake, once calm and contained, now thundered down the valley as a wall of destruction. The first wave slammed into the lakeside houses, tearing them apart like cardboard. Roofs splintered, walls, crumbled cars, flipped and vanished in seconds. Power lines snapped, lighting up the chaos with blue-white sparks. The water devoured everything in its path, roaring louder than any storm. I stood frozen for a moment, unable to breathe. Hoakaren screamed, grabbing my arm. "Get in the truck." I stumbled back inside, my heart pounding. "Hold on," I shouted as I slammed the accelerator. The tires spun in the mud, fighting for traction before finally gripping. We tore up the hill, the truck bouncing over potholes and rocks, windshield wipers slapping furiously. Behind us, I could see the glow of lights disappearing one by one, houses, street lamps, everything swallowed by the flood. The roar of the water followed, echoing up the slopes like a living monster chasing us. When we reached the top of the ridge, I pulled over again, shaking uncontrollably. Karen covered her mouth, her eyes wide in horror. "They didn't listen," she whispered. I looked back. The valley that had once held our perfect little neighborhood was now a violent river. Debris floated everywhere, trees, fences, pieces of rooftops. Somewhere in the chaos I could see the shattered remnants of the clubhouse where Stella had held her precious HOA meetings. It was gone, all of it. I grabbed my camera again, recording the aftermath from the ridge. "It's over," I said quietly. "The Clearwater Dam has completely failed. The entire lower community is underwater. This could have been prevented." Lightning struck again, illuminating something that made my stomach twist, a pink flash near the flood's center. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I realized what it was: Stella Green's house. Her enormous lakefront mansion, the one she bragged about every HOA meeting, was being torn apart by the flood. The foundation collapsed, the structure folding in on itself before vanishing beneath the raging current. The same woman who'd laughed at me for warning her, who called me the paranoid dam guy, was now somewhere in that darkness fighting for her life. For a moment I felt anger, then guilt, then nothing but a hollow, heavy sorrow. Karen reached over and squeezed my hand. "You tried," she whispered. "You did everything you could." I nodded slowly, but my voice trembled. It wasn't enough. We stayed there for nearly an hour, watching as the storm slowly began to weaken. The rain eased into a steady drizzle, and the monstrous roar of water faded into a dull, distant rumble. But the damage was done. Clearwater Estates was gone. When the first rays of dawn finally broke through the clouds, I could see the devastation clearly. The lake was empty, drained into what looked like a massive, jagged canyon of mud and debris. The dam was nothing more than a scarred stump of concrete jutting from the earth. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance as rescue helicopters circled overhead. I could see red and blue lights flickering through the mist, bouncing off the surface of the flooded plain below. I lowered my camera and just stared. All those meetings, all those warnings, all those nights I spent crunching numbers and staring at rainfall charts, and this was the result. The HOA's perfect neighborhood was gone, replaced by ruin. And in that ruin was proof that pride kills faster than any flood. As we drove toward the emergency evacuation center later that morning, I saw familiar faces huddled under blankets, neighbors soaked and shivering, eyes glazed with disbelief. Some were crying, others just stared blankly, their minds unable to process the loss. Then I saw her. Stella Green sat on the curb near the county rescue truck, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, her hair soaked, her makeup streaked down her face. She looked nothing like the queen of Clearwater Estates. No pearls, no smile, no power. Just a woman who finally realized she wasn't in control. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Everything that needed to be said was already written in the ruins behind her. I walked past without stopping. There was nothing left to discuss. That night, sitting in the temporary shelter, I played back my footage. Every frame told the same story. Warnings ignored arrogance, defended nature, answering with vengeance. And for the first time since moving to Clearwater, I felt something unexpected: peace. Because the truth had finally spoken for me louder than any words ever could. At first there was silence, that eerie, breath-holding kind of silence that comes right before the world decides to break apart. Then came the sound. It wasn't just loud, it was colossal, a roar that rolled through the valley like thunder trapped in a canyon, shaking windows and rattling bones. From our vantage point on Ridgeview Hill, I watched as the dam, or what was left of it, gave up completely. The remaining wall folded inward like it had been punched by a giant hand. The ground shuddered beneath my feet. Karen gripped my arm so tightly, her nails dug into my sleeve. The lake didn't drain it, exploded. A towering surge of water erupted from the breach, bursting outward in every direction, carrying chunks of concrete the size of cars. The surge smashed into the first row of homes within seconds. Roofs splintered. Fences disintegrated. Entire vehicles were lifted and tossed like paper boats. And then came the wave. It was easily 40 feet high, maybe more, rolling forward with unstoppable momentum. It slammed into Clearwater Estates, sweeping through streets I'd once walked every morning. The sound of destruction was unlike anything I'd ever heard, metal groaning glass, shattering trees, snapping, and somewhere within it all the faint screams of people who hadn't escaped in time. Karen turned away, burying her face into my shoulder. "Oh my God, Mark, those were our neighbors." I couldn't speak. My throat felt locked. The only thing I could do was stare, recording everything through my trembling camera lens, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. Someone had to remember what happened here, in case the world tried to forget. Down below, the chaos unfolded in waves both literal and human. People climbed onto rooftops as the flood tore through backyards. Others clung to streetlights or trees, their silhouettes flickering against flashes of lightning. Emergency sirens wailed from somewhere in the distance, faint and futile. And there in the middle of it all stood the remains of Stella Green's mansion. Her pristine lakeside masterpiece, the one she loved to show off during HOA meetings, was half submerged, tilting like a sinking ship. I zoomed in through my lens just in time to see its second floor collapse inward, sending a plume of water and debris into the air. It vanished beneath the flood, leaving nothing but a swirl of foam and broken shingles. It didn't feel satisfying. It didn't even feel like justice. It felt like watching someone's arrogance drown an entire community. Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you think she—" "I don't know," I said, my voice hoarse. "But she did this." We stayed there for nearly an hour, watching as the lake transformed into a river of destruction, stretching miles downstream. The flood carried everything: patio, furniture, fences, propane tanks, pieces of people's lives, twisting them together into a churning torrent of ruin. When dawn finally arrived, the rain began to ease. The storm clouds tore open, revealing a faint orange glow on the horizon. Steam rose from the flooded valley, giving the whole scene an otherworldly stillness. We drove slowly down the opposite side of the ridge, toward the county evacuation center. The road was covered in mud and debris, and fallen trees forced us to weave through the wreckage. Everywhere I looked, there was silence, the kind that follows when nature finishes punishing arrogance. We passed the first stretch of homes that had been spared, those built higher on the hillside. Their owners stood outside, pale and trembling, staring at what used to be their neighborhood. One woman was on her knees in her driveway praying. A man clutched a photo frame, mud streaked across the glass. When we reached the community center, it was chaos. Emergency vehicles lined the parking lot. National Guard trucks unloaded supplies. Reporters shouted questions at drenched survivors. I parked near the entrance and just sat there watching people stumble inside barefoot, covered in mud, carrying pets or children, eyes vacant. Then I saw her. Stella Green. She was sitting on the curb, wrapped in a silver rescue blanket. Her hair was matted and tangled, her pink suit stained brown with mud and soot. She looked hollow. No clipboard, no smirk, no power. Just a broken woman who had finally met something she couldn't control. A paramedic crouched beside her, offering water. She didn't even look up. Her hands trembled in her lap, and for the first time I saw fear, real, unfiltered human fear. I stood there in the drizzle watching her. Part of me wanted to confront her, to shout, "I told you," until my voice broke. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. What was the point? The water had already said it louder than I ever could. Karen tugged at my sleeve. "Mark, let's go inside." I nodded, leading her through the crowd. Inside, volunteers handed out blankets and coffee. The smell of wet clothes and smoke filled the air. A TV mounted on the wall showed live aerial footage of Clearwater Estates, or what was left of it. From above, it looked like a war zone. Entire blocks were gone, replaced by swirling brown water and shattered debris. The anchor's voice cracked as he read the caption, "Breaking Clearwater, dam collapse, dozens missing, hundreds displaced." A county official stepped up to a makeshift podium and began briefing the press. Initial assessments suggest the dam failure began around 2, 4, 5 a.m. due to a structural breach in the north section. Emergency crews are coordinating rescue efforts downstream. At this time, residents are advised to remain in designated shelters. I stepped closer, my jaw tightening. North section, I muttered. Exactly where I told them. The official continued. We have received reports that prior warnings were made by a resident, Mr. Mark Hall, concerning cracks in the structure. Every camera turned toward me. Someone whispered my name. I froze. The official gestured toward me. Mr. Hall, would you like to make a statement? Karen squeezed my hand, whispering. You don't have to. But I did. I walked to the podium, drenched and exhausted, facing a room full of cameras and microphones. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. I warned them, I said quietly. Not once, not twice, for months. I gave them photos, data proof. They laughed. They called me paranoid. They told me to stop spreading fear. And now? I paused, glancing at the TV behind me, where the image of the destroyed neighborhood filled the screen. Now our homes are gone. People are missing. And it didn't have to happen. I took a deep breath. If you want a statement, here it is. This isn't just a natural disaster. It's a man-made one built on arrogance, pride, and the refusal to listen. The room fell silent. No one asked a question. No one needed to. When I stepped down, Karen hugged me tightly. You did the right thing, she whispered. But as I looked around at the shattered faces, the injured, the terrified, I couldn't feel right. Not yet. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds began to part, letting the sun break through for the first time in days. Steam rose from the flooded ground, shimmering like ghosts lifting into the air. I walked out into the light and turned toward what used to be Clearwater Lake. From here, I could see the empty basin, a gaping wound in the earth lined with mud and ruin. It was strange in its emptiness. It almost looked peaceful again. The water was gone. The noise was gone. But the silence left behind was deafening. And as I stood there, one thought wouldn't leave me. When nature speaks, you either listen or you drown. The morning after the flood felt like the end of the world. The air was thick with the smell of mud and gasoline, the sky gray and heavy with mist. Everywhere I looked, there was silence, not peaceful silence, but the hollow kind that comes after everything familiar has been erased. When the helicopters finally stopped circling, the true scale of the destruction began to show. Clearwater Estates wasn't a neighborhood anymore. It was a scar, a brown, broken wasteland filled with shattered roofs, cars half buried in silt, and tree trunks lodged in places no tree should ever be. The beautiful blue lake that once reflected sunsets and fireworks was gone, drained into the valley like a bathtub with its plug pulled. Karen and I were allowed back down the ridge with a convoy of emergency crews and National Guard vehicles. The tires sank deep into mud that used to be roads. As we passed what was once our street, I saw pieces of my neighbors' lives scattered like confetti from a cruel celebration. A child's bicycle twisted in a fence, a couch lodged in a tree, a photo album open face down in the dirt. Nobody spoke. The rescuers just moved methodically, searching, calling out names, marking houses with orange paint when they found nothing but debris. At the center of what used to be the dam stood a gaping crater, jagged concrete teeth jutting out like the remains of some ancient beast. Water still trickled weakly through the broken channels, glistening in the gray light. I stopped and stared, trying to comprehend how something so solid, so permanent, could have simply ceased to exist. That's when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Mark Hall. I turned around. It was Detective Sarah Monroe from the County Emergency Task Force, mid-40s, sharp eyes beneath a soaked baseball cap. She extended a gloved hand. We've been reviewing your reports. You're the engineer who sent those warnings, right? I nodded, too tired to speak. She sighed. We found your emails and videos. The timestamp lines up perfectly with the dam's initial breach. My throat tightened. So, they believe me now. Sarah gave a small, sympathetic smile. Let's just say you were right, tragically right. We're compiling evidence for a full negligence investigation. The HOA's leadership is in deep trouble. Stella, I asked. She's alive, Sarah said, glancing down the hill toward the emergency camp. But she won't be smiling anytime soon. I looked where she pointed. In the distance, a news crew surrounded a woman sitting on a folding chair, wrapped in a blanket, her hair a mess of mud and rain. Even from far away, I could tell it was Stella Green. The once pristine queen of Clearwater Estates now looked like a ghost of herself. She stared at the wreckage with glassy eyes, unresponsive to the reporter's questions. A National Guard officer stood nearby, watching her like she might collapse at any moment. I wanted to walk over to tell her everything I'd kept bottled up for months, the anger, the frustration, the endless nights of being ridiculed and silenced. But the closer I got, the more I realized it didn't matter anymore. Stella had already been punished, and not by me. When she finally noticed me, her eyes flickered with faint recognition. "Mark," she whispered, her voice raw. I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I said softly. "You just didn't listen." Her lip trembled, but no tears came. "They told me it was fine. The consultant said it was nothing serious." I shook my head. "You didn't need a consultant. You needed humility." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Around us, the floodwaters gurgled softly through the ruins, carrying away the last traces of what had once been her pride. "Finally," she said. "They're charging me, aren't they? Negligence, obstruction, falsifying safety documents. I imagine that's just the start," I said. Stella looked down at her hands, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. "I thought I was protecting the community. I thought if I kept people calm, it would all be fine." I stared at her, my voice quiet but sharp. "Calm isn't the same as safe. You protected your image, not your people." Her gaze dropped to the mud. I left her there because there was nothing more to say. Later that day, county officials gathered everyone who'd survived at the Civic Center downtown. The room was filled with the smell of damp clothes and fear. The mayor stood at a podium flanked by National Guard officers and FEMA representatives. "Clearwater Estates will be declared a federal disaster area," he announced. "We will begin relocation assistance and temporary housing. Investigations are underway to determine the cause of the dam's collapse." When he mentioned reports of ignored safety warnings, several people turned to look at me. Some nodded silently. Others couldn't meet my eyes. After the meeting, an older man approached me. Mr. Roberts, the neighbor, who'd once told me to relax. His face was streaked with grime, and his hands trembled as he spoke. "Mark, I'm sorry. I should have listened. We all should have. I didn't know what to say." I just placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all lost something, Mr. Roberts. Let's just make sure no one else does." That night back at the shelter, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the sound, the roar of water, the splintering of wood, the screams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wave tearing through the homes, and I wondered how many could have been saved if Stella had acted even one day earlier. Around midnight, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the moon hidden behind thin clouds. In the distance, floodlights illuminated the valley rescue teams, still working, still digging. A reporter approached me cautiously. "Mr. Hall, I'm with Channel 5 News. Could we get your comment for tonight's segment?" I exhaled slowly. "Sure. But make sure you say this right." She nodded, holding out the mic. "This isn't about me being right," I said. "It's about what happens when people in power choose ego over evidence. When someone tells you there's danger, listen, because sometimes the smallest crack isn't a flaw, it's a warning." The reporter thanked me, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked toward the edge of the shelter lot, where the faint sound of the ruined dam echoed through the valley like a ghost refusing to fade. A week later, headlines filled every local paper. HOA president facing negligence charges in Clearwater disaster. Ignored warnings lead to catastrophic flood. Engineers' reports predicted collapse months in advance. For the first time, my name wasn't a punchline. It was a headline. County officials invited me to assist in the structural review of nearby dams and water systems. I agreed, though part of me hesitated. Returning to that world meant reliving the very failure I'd tried to prevent. But maybe, just maybe, it was my way of making sure this never happened again. As we drove past Clearwater one final time, Karen reached for my hand. The lake bed was dry now, the sun baking the cracked mud into brittle patterns. The ruins of the dam stood like a monument, not to engineering failure but to human arrogance. She looked at me gently. "You did everything you could." I nodded. "And next time, maybe someone will listen sooner." As we drove away, I realized something profound. The dam hadn't just held back water. It had held back truth, accountability, humility, and when it finally broke, it released all of them at once. In the end, nature didn't punish us, it merely reminded us who's really in charge. 2 months after the flood, Clearwater Estates was unrecognizable. The once glittering neighborhood had become a desolate plain of cracked mud, rusted metal, and shattered foundations. The smell of stagnant water still lingered, mixed with the sharp bite of diesel from construction trucks clearing debris. What had once been a lakefront paradise was now a graveyard of memories. Every time I returned, I felt both sorrow and disbelief. I parked on what used to be the main street, now a strip of uneven dirt lined with the skeletons of homes. The street signs were twisted, the sidewalks gone. Every few hundred feet, a spray-painted X marked where a house once stood. Karen didn't like coming back here. "It's not healthy," she said. But I wasn't coming back to mourn. I came to remember and to make sure people learned from it. Since the collapse, I'd been working with the county as a volunteer consultant. We inspected other private dams across the region, most of them built decades ago, with the same outdated engineering standards Clearwater had relied on. What I found was alarming: cracks, leaks, corrosion, ignored maintenance logs, the same recipe for disaster repeated again and again. It struck me how human arrogance always repeated itself. People didn't like to be told they were wrong. They didn't like change, and they definitely didn't like the guy who brought bad news. The difference was that now when I showed up at a community meeting, people listened. I'd walk in wearing my mud-stained boots and flannel shirt carrying photos of Clearwater's destruction. I didn't have to raise my voice. I'd simply say, "This is what happens when warnings are ignored." Then I'd show them the footage, the dam bursting, the flood roaring through homes, the aerial shots of devastation. It was grim but effective. I saw fear in their faces, and that fear meant action. Maybe Clearwater's tragedy could save someone else's home. Maybe it could even save lives. 3 weeks later, the county held a public hearing to release the final investigation report. The auditorium was packed: reporters, officials, survivors, even curious onlookers from neighboring towns. I sat near the back with Karen, not wanting to be the center of attention. The lead investigator stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat before speaking into the microphone. After thorough analysis, it has been determined that the Clearwater Dam collapse resulted from long-term structural neglect and administrative obstruction. Multiple warnings were issued to the HOA board by resident and professional engineer Mark Hall, whose reports were repeatedly dismissed. The room buzzed with murmurs. I lowered my eyes, not in pride but in exhaustion. The investigator continued. "We have also confirmed that certain maintenance reports were falsified under the direction of HOA President Stella Green to avoid costly repairs. As a result, Ms. Green faces charges of criminal negligence, falsification of safety documentation, and obstruction of emergency communication." Karen squeezed my hand. They showed photos of the dam before and after my early warning images beside the official failure diagrams. The visual comparison was staggering. You could see the same crack I'd photographed months earlier, now widened into the yawning gap that destroyed an entire community. When the investigator invited me to speak, I hesitated, but the room encouraged me with soft claps and nods. I stepped up to the microphone. "I didn't come here today to say I told you so. I came here to say this: none of this had to happen. We lost lives, homes, dreams, all because people were too proud to admit something was wrong." I looked out over the audience, the survivors, the officials, the press. The problem wasn't the crack in the dam, it was the crack in our judgment. The moment we stop listening to reason, we start building our own disaster. When I finished, there was silence. Not applause, just stillness. And that was better. That meant they heard me. After the hearing, I walked outside into the sunlight. It was one of those bright winter mornings where the air feels sharp and new, like the world is trying to cleanse itself. A few people approached to shake my hand, neighbors who had once called me the paranoid dam guy. One woman said softly, "My son and I only made it out because of your video that night. You saved us." For the first time since the flood, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. "I'm just glad you're here." A black SUV pulled up near the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed as 2 officers escorted Stella Green out in handcuffs. She wore a gray coat and dark sunglasses, her hair tied back in a way that almost made her look like her old self, except now there was no confidence in her posture, no spark in her stride. Our eyes met briefly as she passed. For a second I saw something in her expression, not anger, not defiance, but regret, real heavy regret. And oddly, I didn't hate her. She wasn't evil, just prideful, and pride can drown just as fast as anyone else. Weeks passed. Life started to move again. FEMA cleared the debris, construction crews rebuilt roads, and the county renamed the area Clearwater Memorial Basin, a reminder of what was lost. They even erected a small monument beside the dried lake bed. In memory of the Clearwater flood, a lesson in listening, humility, and responsibility. It was simple, no names, just truth carved into stone. One evening, I stood before that monument alone. The sun was setting over the valley, painting the cracked earth in gold and red. The wind moved softly across the basin, whistling through what used to be the dam's foundation. Karen joined me after a while, slipping her arm through mine. "You did good," she said. I shook my head. "I didn't do enough. I could have done more." "You did what you could," she said gently. They chose not to listen. For a long time we stood in silence, just watching the horizon. Then she smiled faintly. "So what now?" "Back to engineering," I thought about it. "Maybe, but not the same kind. I think I'm done building things that people don't respect. What then? Maybe I start building awareness instead. A few months later, I launched a small nonprofit with the county's support, the Hall Foundation for Structural Safety Awareness. We worked with homeowners associations, local governments, and schools, teaching them how to identify early warning signs of structural risks, cracks, leaks, shifts, and more importantly, how to take them seriously. We weren't building dams, we were building responsibility. Our first seminar was held in a neighboring community center. As I stood at the podium looking out at the audience, families, board members, even teenagers, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I started my talk the same way every time. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to remind you. Water doesn't care about pride. Nature doesn't wait for paperwork. And warnings don't go away just because you ignore them. When I finished, I showed them the photo, the one I'd taken that first morning of the tiny crack on the dam. Just a thin, dark line in the concrete. Something anyone could have dismissed. Then I showed them the next photo, the flood. The wall of water tearing through homes. The room always went silent after that. And that silence, that moment of realization, became my new mission. Months later, standing once again above what used to be Clearwater Lake, I took a deep breath. The earth had healed a little. Grass was sprouting across the dry basin. Birds had returned. Life, in its quiet persistence, had begun to reclaim what human negligence destroyed. I whispered to the wind, maybe now they'll listen. The breeze carried the sound of rustling leaves, the faint trickle of a new stream forming along the valley floor, a sign that nature, despite everything, forgives. I turned toward my truck, the sunlight glinting off the old plaque behind me, and for the first time since the flood I felt light again. Because sometimes justice isn't a courtroom verdict. Sometimes it's a lesson carved into the landscape, one no one will ever forget. When someone warns you about danger, don't dismiss them because their truth makes you uncomfortable. Pride and denial are far deadlier than any flood. We all have a responsibility to listen, to act, and to protect each other before tragedy strikes. So, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place? And don't forget to subscribe, because next time the storm might not wait for a second warning.